Good morning, everyone. Hope you have had a great MCN so far. This is my first time attending the conference, and it has been fantastic. So go a little easy on me, please. I joined the Freer Sackler a little over a year ago, and one of the first things I was tasked with was helping the Docent Corps establish a self-publishing platform using open source software. Before I go into the specifics, though, I do want to give kind of a general scenario of the situation I stepped into, speak a little bit about planning and process, and then go into some of the specific tech and tools we use to implement that process. So at the Freer and Sackler, we have a very energetic and active Docent Corps, about 60 docents total, 5 of which are on the Docent Technology Committee and oversee programming for messaging and technology use for training purposes. As I mentioned, the 5 on the Docent Tech Committee are super energetic and active, and they kind of went rogue, setting up their own training platform on WordPress.com. So that was fantastic. We wanted to make sure to capture that energy, but also kind of bring them back into the fold with adhering to our institutional protocols, software procedures, privacy concerns, etc. So when I joined, there was a recent intern who had helped them move to a self-hosted site using WordPress as the content management system. She had set up a theme for them and helped them move their existing content onto that site. Prior to that, they were mostly operating out of docent binders, manuals, a lot of papers going back and forth. They also had an FTP site, so they did a lot of training to get them signed up for the FTP. They would just dump all the files in this kind of folder list structure and just expect them to find things. These key players here were who all went into kind of advancing it from there. When I started off, as I mentioned, this is the first project, and taking it over, and they're like, okay, we're 90% there, we just need to launch this thing. But after sitting with the Docent Tech Committee, the education department, and then also going through Smithsonian Central, because we had to review all of the security procedures and privacy concerns for the software, it was kind of evident that we needed to kind of take a bigger look at the picture and kind of go back to the drawing board, because the theme wasn't necessarily addressing the needs or usability of the docents. And nor was really the structure. They had really transferred that existing FTP structure and those existing paper documents, and we're just kind of piloting on the website. It's kind of just e-paper, but nothing was very intuitive or easy to get to. And so there were many rounds of meetings. It was very iterative, but what we realized going into it is trying to push things through quickly was not really the answer, and we kind of redid the site twice. Going back to the drawing board and doing the process as one should, with planning, some user testing, etc. So we realized, yes, you should definitely take the time and go through all the necessary steps to prototype, to wireframe, and to move through those revisions. And so I wouldn't say having to go back and restart over was necessarily a failure, but in retrospect, there would have been an easier path. So that's definitely one of my main takeaways, is to make sure not to rush because of the parameters of the project, but give yourself the time and the authority and capacity to say, look, we need to take a step back here and regroup. So on the planning and process components, we really did want to stick with an open source solution. The Freer Sackler is one of the first Smithsonians to fully digitize their collections, and all of our objects are online, high-res, freely available to the public. Keeping with the philosophy of a public institution, we want to make all of our assets and collections freely available. That said, we also want to do the same with any code that we develop. And so this is kind of a project for us, kind of a test pilot project for open sourcing any of the code that we create as this kind of case study for the docent training site, and we intend to do the same for our overall rehaul of the website as well. The two options we were really looking at, and the main ones I would say for content management systems for museum uses to consider at this point, would be Drupal and WordPress, both of which Smithsonian as a whole use, but WordPress, as I mentioned, is ultimately what we decided to go with, seeing that the docents were already familiar with it. That's the platform we're using to power our overall site, so we'd have consistency, and staff resources in-house speak well to that. So this is the beta version of the site that we are launching now currently. You can kind of see the overall layout, the full scroll screen grab of the home screen, and just kind of a closer in version. So we've gone through numerous rounds of mostly just changing the naming and titling. So it went from exhibitions to exhibition resources to ultimately training to keep things simple. I mean, that is exactly what those elements are, and that's the wording they use when they are in-person training. So you'll have all of the training sessions are now online, but instead of it just being long text, docents themselves and the Docent Tech committee, the ones who have editing rights, as well as the education department, can come in and put in audio clips, video clips of the curator presentations or guest speakers, and those are viewable and downloadable. The online articles and other resources that are more evergreen on topical things, topical subjects, the Docent Tech committee can come in and put online as well. All their schedules are available now in one central place. You don't have to physically go in or email one another back and forth. The nice thing as well is all the content's dynamic. So once they put in an exhibition, it's linked to any curators or presenters. So when you pull up their profile page, you can also get back to the exhibition that way. As well, we wanted to have an online interactive roster instead of the print one that they would email back and forth. So we're working on now, and I blanked out the name for privacy, but they can come in and automatically update their profiles, and they can search by day of week when the docents are giving their presentations. We've moved other things online as well, including the docent newsletter, so they get an auto notification whenever that's sent out. The library catalog is now searchable. And then as many of the forms as possible, we are continually migrate to interactive forms, so they don't have to go in to physically to fill out these paper documents. So these are some of the open source plugin tools that we've used to help speed and standardize our coding base. So post types, typically in WordPress on the back end, you'll have post and pages, but to make it easier to break up the content and for them to edit, as well as to assign specific permissions for user roles, we've divided these custom post types. So now there's a section on the side just for training, research. It corresponds to the primary navigation, as well as some extra functionality. We have custom fields that we've set up for each one. So training, for instance, you can see in the back end where they can log in on training, and those fields map directly to these content types. The same for newsletter. This is another great resource for generating content, content chunks to use in customizing the default install. As well, we had custom roles. So the docent is the base, what was normally a subscriber level user role. We have two similar editor roles, the Docent Tech Committee and the Education Department, so they can come in and edit their respective sections. These are the two plugins we use to power the profiles. We ultimately went with Ultimate Member. And then in the front end, the theme design we built using a starter theme, underscores. These are two variants of it, but we built that from a ground up with a template, a static template that we're moving to for the overall site, but we made it dynamic within WordPress itself. So that said, we are now looking to continue to refine the code, ongoing evaluation and maintenance, and sharing code and collaborating, along with the hopes of when we do share the code, that it will also be shared internationally and help, and contributors will help translate it as well. So going here, we invite you to join us in conversation on our newly revamped WordPress and Museums Listserv. If you go to the shortened URL there, you can subscribe. There's tons of resources. You can ask questions, post comments, as well the GitHub repository. Right now it's just a placeholder, but once we fully launch things, we'll have all the code bases up there, documentation, as well as this presentation and links. Thank you.
So we're going to take questions, and just to let you know for the recording, I'll be repeating back the questions before everybody answers so that we have what they were. And there was a question here.
This is for Ryan. Is there any thought to using what you've got so far to schedule docents?
So the question was whether or not there was a component to this that was being used to schedule docents.
Yes, that's a great question, and one of the most asked for features from the Docent Corps. And currently, right now, there is an intern in the education department reviewing various software options for the scheduling. So at the moment, we just have the static PDFs that are being posted to the schedule page. But yes, ideally, we want a system that'll tie into both the overall for your Sackler Museum calendar as well as scheduling options for the docents, so they can do their absence request. They'll see what tours are available. They can trade shifts. But right now, that process needs to go through the review process from Smithsonian Central to make sure any of the software we use for security risk and otherwise is usable in a government institution. And so there are 2 cloud-based systems and 1 WordPress plugin that we're evaluating at the moment. But that would be phase 2. Thank you. And I can give you the specific ones later if you want to talk about those options. Okay, sounds good.
Other questions? Chris.
No, I'm the same person. So you go.
Go ahead, Greg.
It's also along the same lines for Ryan. Did you, or has there anybody talked and have there? I'm grabbing my part.
You do this, Greg.
Yeah.
Has there been any discussion about a discussion forum for the docents, or do they have another way of? Do they have a current system that they use?
Okay, so the question was whether or not within this website there would be a space for a discussion forum for the docents.
Yes, and initially we did have a forum on the site in the first wave of the beta, but it was actually scrapped. It was powered by, when we did have Buddy Press initially for the docent profiles, there's also a forum plugin module that works alongside it. However, it was decided between the Docent Tech Committee and the Education Department that there were issues of moderation and also usage. The thought was really they wanted to make sure that the core features and information they wanted to share first was accessible on the site and then contested, and then perhaps down the road they'll reintroduce the forum. Again, we went back and forth on the benefit versus value, and at the time we just decided to hold off on it. But yeah, both of those would be great.
Chris, did you want to?
How about online training?
So the question was about whether or not online training was available through this.
Currently, no. It's really just a static, not static, but a storage house for the existing trainings. We use Smithsonian for lots of their online training for staff and others, Moodle, and there are other great open source learning platforms. That's a feature we could perhaps introduce in the future, but it's not currently requested. And I don't know, that's something we'd have to evaluate, I think, and put out to the docents to see what would be the benefit and usage of that. Because right now they traditionally really do like the in-person, face-to-face talks, and then just having the resources to go back to for a refresher and to print out. But it would be interesting to see in what applications that might be an ongoing, more beneficial thing.
I'm actually going to follow up on that because I also work with docents. So I would say that one of the applications that I could see for having online training would be if there was a way to, say, like stream a training that's happening, because we sometimes have docents who aren't able to come to a training, but they still want to have a way to connect to it. And so if there was a way to do it through something like this, I could, like, that would be an application that I could see, knowing my Docent Corps, where they're like, oh, but I'm going to be in Florida that week. And, you know, they're like, but I really wanted to come to the training, and then they just missed the training. So, any other questions? Greg.
For Eric, actually. Okay. I just wonder if you have other examples or know of other examples of citizen history projects in museums.
Yes, that's a great question. So oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
So the question was about whether or not there are other museums that are doing citizen history projects.
So one of the groups we worked with a lot has been the Zooniverse, and they do a lot of citizen science projects, but also they've been doing some citizen history project. I believe I want to say it's the Imperial War Museum in London. They've done something along the same lines as well. Another good book, the Participatory Museum, I would encourage you to look into as well. But a lot, again, of what we've learned has been from citizen science, because citizen history is still very much an emerging field. And so we've been doing a lot of work that hasn't necessarily been done on this scale before.
So in the interest of time, because we are actually at time, I'm going to wrap this up, but I want to thank both Ryan and Eric, and thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you.